Good morning, everyone. We studied this week's Torah portion of Pekudei, and I'm studying the second discourse on selections from Likutei Sichos to the portion of Pekudei. Just as an introduction, today we're going to discover a deeper Kabbalistic meaning to text that appears not in its place. And the only way to explain it is based on Kabbalah. So to me, it's very exciting. Very short introduction. This week's Torah portion, many years, is a combined portion with the previous week's portion, Vayakel. This year, we read them separately. And Pekudei, this week's portion, is the last portion that concludes the book of Shmot, Exodus. Why is it called Shmot, this book, the second? Anyone?
The first parsha says Eivei Shemot.
What does Shemot mean? Names. So because the book begins with the verse, these are the names of the Jewish people who lived in Egypt, that's why it's called Shemot. We will see how the Rebbe will connect the end of the book to the beginning of the book. Also, the end of the book to the beginning of the third book, the book of Leviticus. What's the name in Hebrew for the book of Leviticus?
Vayikra.
Vayikra. What does Vayikra means? Calling. He called. Hashem is calling Moshe for what purpose? To command them about the sacrifices to bring on the altar in the tabernacle, in the temple, which we just finished building this week. We finished the building, the exact parts, that the way they are construction, the amount of donations that were brought, and next week begins the use of the temple. So next book is going to be, it's called the book of the Kohanim, Torah Kohanim, because it's all about how to bring sacrifices, how to slaughter them, what to have in mind, what type of animal, how to you qualify an animal, etc. Back to Pekudei. Says the Rebbe, the conclusion of this week's Torah reading describes in detail the erection of the sanctuary and how the divine presence rested within it. As it is written, the text reads the following towards the end of this week's portion. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the sanctuary. So when the cloud covers the tent of meeting, they know God is in the temple. Indeed, the divine presence was manifest so powerfully that Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of God filled the sanctuary. The text continue reading. Velo yachol Moshe. Moshe was unable to enter the tent of meeting for as long as the cloud is hanging over the tent of meeting. Why? Because the glory of God filled the tent, and therefore Moshe cannot enter. Afterwards, the Torah relates. Here is the text that we're going to be continuously dealing with. When the cloud would ascend from upon the sanctuary, the children of Israel would set forth on all their journeys. But if the cloud did not ascend, they would not set forth until the day it did ascend. The Torah concludes with the following words. When the cloud ascended, lifted above the tent, they knew it's time to move. If the cloud is still rested on the tent, they're not moving.
So when does Moshe ever...
When will they move? When the cloud moved. When did Moshe
ever get into the tent?
So when the cloud moved up.
He goes into the tent to start moving out?
No, when the cloud moves, that's when he goes to the tent to speak to God.
I thought when the cloud moves up,
move means lifted.
Right. You're talking lifted. When the cloud lifts, I thought that's time to travel.
Right. So Moshe walks in, speaks to God, and then they take it apart.
That's the only time he gets to touch.
Yes. That's the Torah portion of this week.
We have to ask yourself, why would he go in there? It's time to travel, no time to talk.
Right, but the glory of God filled the tent. Velo yachol Moshe, it says.
Well, I agree with you.
Ki shachan alav ve'anan, because the cloud rested, uchvod Hashem maleh et hamishkan, and the glory of God filled the entire Mishkan. There's no room to enter.
How can you ever do sacrifices?
I'm asking you the same question.
Okay.
So my answer would be that they were allowed, later on, we're going to read about sacrifices just for a purpose. They're allowed to enter. but Moshe cannot enter to speak to God as he did when the cloud is lifted.
But there's a dichotomy of thoughts here. Cloud lifted, it's time to move. What are you doing to sit there? Just go to God, just move.
Okay, so the move it gives you 8-10 hours. In the morning, they wake up, sunrise, and the cloud is eye above. Let's say the cloud is, it's like a cover to the tent of meeting.
Right. So
In the morning, it's about 200 feet above. Now it's time to move.
Right.
They actually had a trumpet and shofars.
Right. So then,
Moshe goes in and says, God, I need help with this. What instruction and what guidance you have? As soon as he comes out, the Kohanim, the families assemble. Let me finish speaking. And each one knows their assignment, the walls, the tapestry, then the furniture. And they say, we're ready to. Then they blow shofar again, and then they start moving. It takes them 5 to 6 hours to put it together and start moving. And
To take it down.
to take it down and start moving. Prior to that point, Moshe was speaking to Hashem. He doesn't speak to Hashem 7 hours. He speaks to Hashem for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Says the Rebbe. The Rebbe is going to ask a simple question. Clarification is necessary. On the surface, these two verses about the cloud covering the temple and Moshe cannot enter. And the only time that they know how to move and journey is when the cloud lifted. These two verses belong in Parshat Ba'alotcha. Later on, when we read about the journeys, you should write that you know when they journey, when the cloud went up, when the cloud came down, they knew now they're going to stop. In the morning, they look at the cloud, they stay here, and so on.
But that's it.
That which describe the manner in which the Jews would journey in the desert. And indeed, they are repeated there with more elaboration. If you go to Be'alotcha, you will find chapter 9, verse 15, beginning verse 15. The Torah gives the exact same words with greater details. In other words, it's superfluous. Not only it's superfluous, it's not in place, it doesn't belong here. What is the connection between the manner in which the Jews would journey, that they would journey only when the cloud ascended, but if it had not, they would not set forth, with the content of the present Torah portion reading, whose focus is the manner in which the divine presence will rest within the sanctuary? Says, I don't understand. The journeying, when they move, when they stop, is not here. We're talking about the actual building. We're talking about the glory of God filled the temple. And why is that you have to know the journey that they move when the cloud lifted and when the cloud went down, they didn't. In Be'alotcha, when the Torah talks about the Masaot, the journeys, the Torah repeats the same verse, the same words with greater Vamidbar, yeah. You understand the question, Ali? Sforno, he tried to address this question, explain that this very fact, that when the cloud would ascend above the sanctuary, the children of Israel would set forth, shows the degree of permanence with which the divine presence would rest within the sanctuary, so much so that it would not withdraw from the sanctuary at all until the Jews needed to set forth. Sforno, a commentator, says, you know why the Torah tells it to us? The Torah wants us to know that any time, good or day or night, God is among the Jewish people, because they always look out and they see the cloud over the temple. If the cloud is lifted, which God has descended, then they know they have to move. As soon as they stop at their journey, the cloud is there. Therefore, the Torah wants to tell that to us here, to show how great the temple was, this tabernacle, because it to symbolize or brought God in with their day-to-day life throughout their life.
What does the cloud cover when they're under, when it's time to stop?
The cloud goes down.
Under what? Because
On the tent, on the furniture.
it's in pieces. So
It's in pieces, right? So it will cover, it will go down. I think even a better answer would be that the cloud suddenly, the cloud would advance before them.
Okay.
That's how they know the direction,
Right,
okay?
okay.
Because the GPS didn't,
Right, right.
okay?
They follow the.
So the cloud suddenly will come down.
Yeah. And the time to stop.
They come into that cloud, within the cloud, they will build it. So Sforno says the Torah is mentioning it here, even though it repeats itself again, to show us that God was continuously 24/7 throughout the journey in that in the camp.
Right.
And that's the power of the temple. Yes.
I don't sound irreligious, but God goes to his husband above the tent, when they're inside, so Moshe would go
It says field. Ukvod Hashem maleh et hamishkan. The glory of God filled. How do they know glory of God filled? Is because the cloud covers.
the whole Mishkan.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so.
All I'm saying is it didn't have to cover the whole Mishkan, it could be right above it. and Moshe
All
would
right,
run in and
so
out.
you are a genius.
Above the tent.
In your design,
Nevertheless,
there's God's design.
I have a better question.
Very good.
They were in the cloud continuously. They were in a cloud. It says that they were in a cloud that keeps the air cool, prevented from dangerous creatures to hit them. So I don't understand. There was a cloud. They were in a cloud. Imagine you're in a fog. The way I understand cloud is when you have a foggy day, right?
Yeah.
You're inside a fog.
You see that?
How can you tell the difference between that and the glory of God, of the cloud of God? So it must be something different. There must be something unique and a cloud that is very visible. Nevertheless, on the surface, this explanation is not satisfactory. From the wording of the verse, it is apparent that its emphasis is to relate the manner in which the Jews would journey, to refer to the comment of the Medrash, as the Medrash says on this verse. This is a description of the journeys. Thus, as mentioned, clarification is necessary. What is the connection between the description of the journeys, which seemingly belonged in Parshat Baalotcha, where indeed a lengthy description is in place, with the description of the erection of the sanctuary and the dwelling of the divine presence within it? So, Rabbi, I understand you want to say that God's glory filled the temple throughout the journeys all the time. We understand. But why the Torah has to say that when the cloud went up, they moved. When the cloud stopped moving, they stopped. And God, this does not belong here. It belongs to where the details of the journeys. And it actually is repeated. It's mentioned in Baalotcha with greater detail. The question is reinforced when considering our sage's statement that the beginning of the book of Vayikra continues the narrative in the verse that precedes the verse. When the cloud would ascend, God will, glory of God will be moved from the temples. Since Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting, God called to Moshe, thereby enabling him to enter the tent of meeting. The Medrash tells us not only this is something out of place, that the glory of God filled the temple through the cloud and Moshe could not enter, and when the cloud goes up, God is left the temple. And when the cloud came down, God is filling the temple. The first verse of Vayikra is Vayikra el Moshe, says the Medrash, because we read before that Moshe cannot enter the tent of meeting. As long as the glory of God filled the tent, God is calling Moshe, enabling him to enter through the cloud. So again, this idea of the journey, that when the cloud goes up, they move, and when the cloud goes down, they rest, is really out of place. A, it doesn't belong to the topic here, it belongs to journeys. And B, Medrash says that the connection of Vayikra to the verses that Moshe cannot enter because the cloud of God filled the tent, they are connected together, that only because he couldn't enter. That's why Vayikra el Moshe, Vaydaber Hashem elav, Me'oel Moed. God called Moshe and he spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Say to him, here, I'm going to let you and enable you to enter the tent of meeting despite the cloud. So again, this in the middle, an island of two verses that telling us journeying is not there. So these are double points of the question. Ali, do you understand the question? Thus, the two verses that describe the Jews' journeys interrupt the sequence of the verses. Here, Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting. And immediately, in God, the Vayikra, God called Moshe. Ostensibly, the narrative is interrupted by the peripheral matter that seemingly shares no connection to the sanctuary. Says the Rebbe, this is an island between two sections that are connected, and this is totally out of place, as evident from the fact that it will be repeated in Baalotcha, where we deal with the journeys, and in greater detail. Do you understand the question? To me, it's a very powerful question. I just want to show the introduction again. It is not so hard to understand the Rebbe's teaching here, but you need to have in mind that that's the only way to explain this question properly. Says the Rebbe, all of the concepts in the Torah are precise. Since the Medrash states that the beginning of the book of Vayikra, God's calling to Moshe, comes in sequence to the end of this week's parsha, Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting. It follows that the connection also involves the content of the two Torah readings in which these verses are found. Says the Rebbe, there must be the fact that the tent of meeting, the cloud is lifted and then they move. It has to do with the topic that we are discussing. The intent is that the book of Vayikra, which is described as the book of sacrifices, comes after not only the description of the building and erection of sanctuary, the place where the where sacrifices are brought, but also after the details of the manner in which a divine presence was manifest in the sanctuary is described in this Torah reading. In particular, this is true because that is the subject matter concluding this Torah reading. Says the Rebbe, here it is possible to say that this is also the reason that after stating Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting, Scripture apparently interrupts the conceptual flow and speaks about the journeys of the Jews associated with the cloud ascending from upon the sanctuary. That is, the withdrawal of divine presence from the sanctuary. The sequence implies that the inner meaning of the sacrifices is connected less with the manifestation of the divine presence within the sanctuary and more with the travels of the Jewish people in all their journeys. Those journeys require the withdrawal of the divine presence in the interim, as will be fully explained later. What the Rebbe is saying is, in summary, the point of the Rebbe's point, it's not out of context. It's actually the very important part that continues to tell us that what God wanted to be achieved through the sacrifices to bring godliness into the world happens not while the sanctuary stood and divine presence covering the tent of meeting, but when divine presence is removed from the tent of meeting and they journey. And that's why before you continue on to the purpose of the temple to bring sacrifices, reach nichoach, an aroma, a pleasant aroma for God, meaning bringing God and manifesting God in this universe, it happens only when mostly when the cloud has lifted from the tent of meeting and the glory of God is lifted outside of the tent. And therefore, it has to be here because it's part of the purpose of the temple of meeting. So, and as the Rebbe was explaining, it looks like a dichotomy. You build a temple to bring God, and then you tell me that you want to bring God only when the temple is moving and glory of God is removed, and that's what the topic of the Rebbe's discussion. The Rebbe says, the above concepts can be clarified, and the Rabbi is going to go into a whole discussion about the beginning and the end of the Torah portion. The Rabbi says here, the above concepts can be clarified by first explaining the connection between the conclusion of the book of Shemot and the beginning based on the principle that the end is implanted in the beginning and the beginning is implanted in the end. We have a rule in the book of creation, a book that's attributed to Adam or to Abraham, but it was written by Rabbi Akiva, the master, the teacher of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the earliest book of Kabbalah. It's a lot of, so to say, statements that need a lot of explanations. One of them is, every beginning is implanted in the end, and every end is implanted in the beginning. In other words, when I start building a house, do you know what I had in mind when I decided to build a house? Look at the finished product. When it's all been finished, you say, now I see what you had in mind when you wanted to do it. If I want to define what you had in mind, look when you finish the project. Because if you continue the project, you continue adding more rooms or breaking more walls to put doors and windows, what you really wanted is not yet done. You don't even know. I don't know what you wanted. Only when you say to me, I'm done, I'm finished, I got the CO, I know that's what you wanted. In other words, there are parts of my desire that were not known until they actually come to fruition. And so the beginning is implanted in the end, and the end is implanted in beginning. When I started the project, and I know I need to hire an architect, and I need to hire an interior designer, and I need to hire a mason and a plumber and an electrician, it's all planted in because what I had a finished project. So I wanted so many sinks, and I wanted a bathroom next to my bedroom. So I know that this was my desire. So the end is planted in the beginning. That's why I hired these people at the beginning. Is that clear? Not so much, Ellie?
It's clear that the end is planted in the beginning, because you start to build something.
So
you've got in mind what the end is gonna be.
So when I start a project,
Yeah.
I don't say, let's start and then we'll see how it goes. I
Right.
say, this is what I want. I want 120 square feet, and I want 2 bathrooms, and
Yeah,
I
you
want
know what the
dairy
end-
and
You
meat
know what the end is.
N-
So the end is implanted in the
in the
beginning.
beginning.
But the other direction, that the beginning's
No.
implanted in the end. I'm not-
The beginning is implanted in the end. You look at the end, and you know what you had in mind
But
when you
knew that at the
started.
beginning.
Huh?
You knew that at the beginning.
I didn't know what you did, what you wanted. When I look at your finished project,
Yeah.
I say, that's what you had in mind when you started.
It's the other person.
Okay. All right. The other person.
It's the other person, right? You look at someone's finished product and you say, now I know what you had in mind when you started.
But it's from the beginning to the end.
In other words, you
Right,
don't
right.
clear the land saying to yourself, let's wait and see how much land can I clear, and then based on that I'll build. Because that's not a proper thinking
I
or part
understand
of
beginning to the end.
project.
Okay,
I try to explain it to you. It's
good enough.
Says the Rebbe, therefore in the Torah, the beginning of the book and the end of the book are all work with each other. You read the end of the book of Shemot, you can see what the beginning is talking about. You read at the beginning of the book, you can tell what the end is going to be talking about. No, because it's not about sequence of events. You're looking at the idea that you had in mind when you started the book, and you find what you read at the end. That idea is planted already at the beginning. And when you read the end, it must be connected to the beginning, to the start. Says the Rebbe.
They're both about
In the
counting.
present instance,
They're
They're both about counting.
the bottom.
It's all about counting. Thank you. That's the above concepts can be clarified by first explaining the connection between the conclusion of the book of Shmos and the beginning based on the principle the end is implanted in the beginning and the beginning is implanted in the end. In the present instance, the connection between the beginning of and end of the book of Shmot is also expressed by the fact that the name of both the first and last Torah reading of the book reflect the concept of counting. What does the word Shmot? Counting the names. What does Pekudei means? An accounting of the material, an accounting of the actual building. Shmot is connected with counting, as Rashi explained. Although God counted Yaakov's son in their lifetime by their names, in the book of Vaychi, you read already the name of Vayigash. He counted them again after their death. Again, in Shemot, they already died, he counts them again, to make known how precious they were to him, because they were likened to the stars. And Pekudei is connected with the counting, for as Rashi explained, it refers to counting the weights of the donations for the sanctuary and all the implements of all its service. So again, Pekudei is an accounting of material and use of it. Shemot is an accounting of the people who already died. The content of the book of Shemot focuses on the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. This leads to the conclusion. Why? Because it's called the book of redemption, by the way. This leads to the conclusion that the concept of redemption is connected with the theme of counting, the subject that connects the beginning of the book and its conclusion. This requires explanation. On the surface, counting and redemption are opposites. Why? The fact that an object can be counted indicates that the objects are limited to their sum. Indeed, the process of counting highlights that fact. In contrast, redemption in its ultimate sense reflects the process of going out of Egypt, living in exile, and transcending its all limitations. So, David, this is a book of redemption, taking out the Jewish people. Counting must be connected to redemption because it starts with counting and it ends with counting. But counting is limitations. You count something that there's a measure. If it's immeasurable, you can't count it. Counting means that everyone counted is important. So it's defined by a weight, by volume, by height, by color, whatever it might be. Redemption, Geula, by its very definition, the ultimate of Geula is breaking all boundaries. It had to happen through miracles. The 10 plagues, the split of the sea, all that, the killing of the firstborn, all that is miracles breaking the nature. Otherwise, you can't achieve redemption. And therefore, redemption and counting, which is limitation and above limitation, are contradictory. They are a dichotomy. Says the Rebbe, this seeming paradox is also reflected in the beginning of the book itself. Says Rebbe, even if this is in general a contradiction in the book. It's called the book of redemption, and it's all about counting. The beginning and the end is counting. Says the Rebbe, let's look at the book of Shemot. It starts with counting. The paradox is also reflected in the beginning of the book itself. The first Torah reading in the book of Shemot, which alludes to the entire content of that Torah reading, is also called Shemot, meaning names, and referring to a specific number of people, 70 descendants of Yaakov who ascended to Egypt. Nevertheless, immediately thereafter, Scripture relates the following. The children of Israel were fruitful and became numerous, and they multiplied and became very, very prodigious. This indicates a proliferation that entirely exceeded ordinary bounds. Since this verse is also part of Parshat Shemot, it follows that this prodigious proliferation is part of the process of counting alluded to by the name of the Torah reading. Says the Rebbe, the reason we call it Shemot, the portion, is because the entire portion is about names. What is names? Names is counting. Immediately after counting the names of the Jewish people who came to Egypt, 70 who died, what does the Torah says? Ubnei Israel, the children of Israel, paru, vayishretzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, bimod, meod. So many words to be using for a description that the expansion was boundaryless, without numbers. Actually, we see it in 86 years of the slavery, they became a nation of 3 million from 70. It is unfathomable. The only way to explain it is that they would give a six baby in one every time they give birth. It's not natural. It's not the proper way. So you call it names, the portion, denotes boundaries, denotes limitations. You tell me that the names were 70, and immediately after you talk about the present situation, which is boundaryless. There is no limitations. Says the Rebbe, the same exact dichotomy or contradiction is in Pekudei. A similar paradox is found in the conclusion of the book. As mentioned, the phrase Pekudei Mishkan, the accounts of the sanctuary, indicates a reckoning and limitation, right? Pekudei means we know exactly how much gold came, how much silver came, what they did with what. So it's all about limitations. Nevertheless, for all the sacred articles of the sanctuary are specific in number and limited. Nevertheless, the conclusion of Parshat Pekudei, we read, Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of God filled the sanctuary, which describes just how unbounded the manifestation of the divine presence in the sanctuary was. Its manifestation was so powerful that it exceeded the capacity of Moshe, the most perfect of all humanity, to the extent that he could not enter the tent of meeting. I says, Rabbi, same thing is Pekudei. What is Pekudei? Pekudei is accounting. And the Torah talks about exact amount of gold, silver, and copper, and wool, and wood, and what they did, and how they built it. The ark, the menorah is so many amma, the mizbeach. And then, how do you conclude the story? That the glory of God was so powerfully that Moshe could not enter that tent of meeting. Meaning, it's exceeded limitation. God's glory was so powerful that even Moshe, the most refined, the ultimate of humanity, couldn't connect to it, couldn't enter. So it's a dichotomy we did about. Ali, do you understand? So the Rebbe, let's summarize it. The Rebbe points that the word of Shemot, the book of Shemot in general, is limitation, numbers, names. And the book is called the Book of Redemption. Redemption is breaking all limitations. That's one contradiction. The second, the beginning of the Torah, the first book is called Shemot, names, and you talk about names, immediately you tell me that the Jewish people expanded beyond limitation. The end of the book, same story. The name is Pekudei. Pekudei means accounting or numbers with limitations. And then when you finish describing all the limitations and how precise everything was, you say that the glory of God filled the tent in such a level that it broke all boundaries, and therefore even Moshe, most refined, the pinnacle of humanity, couldn't enter the tent of meeting.
You don't have to say anything about Moshe. All you have to say is that the glory of God was limitless, and that's it. You don't have to be an inference of Moshe. Why talk about Moshe at all?
Because the next book, Vayikra El Moshe, Hashem calls Moshe and he says to him, come in, I will allow you to enter.
Okay.
Otherwise, what's the connection to the next book? In other words, God needed to call Moshe, says the Medrash, because we read that he couldn't enter the tent of meeting. You have to say that.
So it makes it limitless at both beginning and end. It shows the limitlessness of beginning and end.
Well, I don't know, because then, God brought Moshe into this limitless, and Moshe is a finite, limited human.
I'm saying, so the beginning and the end, both are linked to the same thing.
Right.
Does
But-
this have any parallels to when he went up on Mount Sinai?
We don't know. We don't know. Perhaps, but I don't want to get there. To offer a broad explanation of the above. Now the Rebbe is going to start developing the answer. So we understand first the Rebbe says this journey that God's glory, the cloud lifted and God's glory left the temple, that's when the journey didn't belong here. For many reasons. First, we're talking about the building, the temple, not about journeys. Second, the next portion, the beginning of Vayikra, which is immediately next, is about calling God and bringing him back. So what this has to do with lifting and moving away? Says the Rebbe, that is precisely the purpose, because that's part of this project. Without the journey, there is no purpose. And the Rebbe says, let's begin. He starts telling us in general the idea between limitation and limitless. The beginning of the book is limitation and limitless. The end of the book is limitation and limitless. The names of the two portions are all about accounting and limitations, right? Okay. Now the Rebbe starts bringing the answer. Says the Rebbe, to offer a broad explanation of the above. The ultimate goal is to achieve an unbounded state, a state of redemption, one that transcends the boundaries and limitations of the material world. However, the intent is not that this unlimited state should nullify the world and its limitations, but rather that there should be a fusion of the infinite in the finite. That's to me the key. What the Rebbe is saying. The reason God created us as Jewish people, as the Rabbi is going to talk in details, is God wants us to bond with godliness. What is godliness? Infinite. However, the way to connect to it infinite is within the finite universe and infusing the finite universe with infinite, not breaking the finite. In other words, not saying, I'm going to be godly, I'm going to study Torah, I don't care about eating, I don't care about doctor's instructions, I don't care about my family, I don't care about making a living, because it's all about infinite. If it's infinite and limitless, Mirza Hashem, everything will be fine. It doesn't work like that. God wants us to bring infinity into the finite, infusing the finite with infinite. By the way, this is, the Rabbi will explain in a moment, this is unique to the Jewish people. This paradoxical fusion is reflected in a verse from the prophecies of Hosea that describe the future number of the Jewish people. The number of the children of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured and counted. They will be numbered, but the number will be without measure, to the extent that it will not be possible to count them. Hosea says the number of the Jewish people will be so vast, like the sand of the sea that cannot be counted. I don't understand. If it cannot be counted, why do you say the number of the Jewish people?
Yeah.
There will be, meaning there is a finite, defined number. And immediately it says that cannot be counted. He said it clearly. Ali, you understand the
I understand.
Similarly, regarding the sanctuary, the divine presence that is beyond measure and limits was manifest in the sanctuary and its sacred utensils, each of which had a specific number and measure as explained above. Why? And the Rebbe will explain. So in other words, the temple is reflecting Hosea's dichotomy. There will be a number of the Jewish people, but that number cannot be counted because they will be so numerous. Says the Rebbe, this seeming paradox stems from God's ultimate intent in creation, his desire for a dwelling in the lowest realms. This is accomplished through two seemingly contradictory elements. A, the dwelling must be fit for God's essence, which God is utterly unlimited, transcending our world and indeed the entire spiritual cosmos. And B, on the other hand, the dwelling must be established within the lowest realms, in this physical world, below which there is none. That is a place that is measured and limited. God wanted a dwelling place for himself, but it's God, it's infinite. He wanted to dwell in a finite place. It's a contradictory. How can you put something that's infinite in a finite? It's impossible. But that's the miracle that God is creating by creating Jewish people. These two dimensions, a dwelling fit for God's essence and its manifestation, specifically in the absolutely lowest realm, are expressed as a whole in the distinction between the souls of the Jewish people and the world. Says the Rebbe, the inner dimension of dwelling for God is that he dwell and rest specifically within the souls of the Jewish people, that the souls of the Jewish people be a resting place for him. Since Israel and the Holy One, blessed be, are entirely one, the Jews are the true dwelling for God's essence, for they are, as it were, one with God's essence. Just like the temple is a choice place where God manifests and the glory of God fills the tent, and people could not enter, the glory, the cloud, so are the Jewish people. We are the temple of God as in the human, within the human race. And God will do the two opposites, to the dichotomy of the two opposites. One, which is limited, finite, human, and the other, they bring in God, which is infinite. Although the term a dwelling in the lowest realms is also used regarding the world at large, the intent there is entirely different. In that context, the term implies merely that it is perceived within the world that its entire existence depends solely on God's essence. And aside from him, there is absolutely no existence whatsoever. Not that the physical entities identify as manifestation of godliness. Nevertheless, God's dwelling within the Jewish people is to be established specifically in the lowest realms. That is, through the divine services of the Jews in this lowly world, by making material entities conduits for godliness. It is specifically through such services that the source of the souls of the Jewish people, as they are one with God's essence, is expressed in a revealed manner. In other words, to put it in another way, when do the Jews attain the state of being a dwelling for God in a revealed manner? That is, when are they one with God's essence without the limitations or obstacle? When they carry out the divine service and make this lowly realm itself a fit place for God's dwelling. In this way, the Jews show that even the limitations, finiteness, and concealment that prevail in this world, lowly realm, do not present an obstacle to this purpose. Did you understand what is the rabbi saying? When a Jew is living in a world of limitations and different difficulties and challenges, and he is able to reveal God within the limitations, that's when the purpose of God's glory to be in the world is fulfilled. But when a Jew lives an infinite life, a spiritual life, and that's when he brings God, then you did not bring the dichotomy, those two opposites together. The two opposites must be too extreme, because God desires to have a dwelling in the lowest realm. So you have to find the Jew who is bound by many limitations, a spouse, the children, medical issues, for eating habits, taking good care of your body, socializing, and you bring godliness into those areas of your life. That's when you achieve the cloud of glory resting on the tent, because the tent itself is very limited and the glory of God is infinite and is resting within the tent. I can achieve a temple in me when I bring the godliness into the finite part of my life. Did you understand that? Did you understand that? The Rebbe goes on to say that the book of redemption is the first book of the Torah, Bereshit, is the birth, the creation of the universe. It's not about Jewish people. The second book is all about Jewish people. Because it's about Jewish people, what defines a Jew as opposed to a non-Jew? That is able to bring those two opposites, just like the tent of meeting as opposed to other tents that were in the desert. That God, infinite, is resting within finite. So a Jew is able to bring infinite into finite. That's why Shemot begins with limitations, it ends with infinite. That's why the end of the book, Pekudei, begins with counting and says God could not, the glory of God rested and Moshe could not enter because it's infinite. Now, right? So the beginning has those two, the end of the book has those two. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why God is going to tell us that when the glory of God lifted from the tent, they journeyed, right? They knew that God has left, the glory of God left the temple when the cloud is lifted and they can move. This is not to tell us about journeys. This is to tell us, when you serve God, when the glory of God is lifted, when you're outside a holy realm of the synagogue, of Torah, of your inner circle of righteous people, but you go into the world and you are acting and serving God, bringing the infinite into the finite. So therefore, the conclusion of the entire book, the book of redemption, which is infinite, the conclusion of the book which talks about bringing God into this universe by creating a house for God, is expressed only when the cloud is lifted and they are traveling. What does traveling denotes? The cloud of glory of God is lifted, is away. And I'm able to make the infinite within the finite limitations. Otherwise, if it's only in one place, perhaps the dichotomy is not that much. Do you understand that? Now it answers all the questions. Says the Rebbe, from here we can learn a very important point. And that is, when we fail, when we misbehave, when we find ourselves at a very, very low point, we should realize it's part of the journey. It is for the purpose of infusing it with godliness and infinity. So if I have an addiction, if I raise my voice, if I lose my temper or I lose my limitations, instead of getting depressed, which is the devil, the evil inclinations, craftsmanship, I should turn around and say, this is the lowest of limitations that can be. Let's infuse it with godliness and turn it around and say, let's apologize. Let's create guards that it shouldn't repeat. Let's make up something positive, connect with people in a kind way. In other words, find the limitations of our life, each one their own limitations, and bring the glory of God into that limitations to bring the infinite within finite. And that's the conclusion of the book of Shemot. Now we understand why the real last verses is about God glory filled, and that they move in or journeying or stopping based on the cloud of the glory of God. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.